This is how to install a race body kit on a BMW S1000RR, specific to the front fairings. This video will focus on installation of a set of front fairings from Alpha Racing, which will be the headlight housing, the side, uppers, and then the lower piece. There will be a second video that will focus on the tail section, including installation of the lighter, shorter subframe. And the link to that video is in the description below. So the first thing I have to do is get the shield off. It's just 8 screws up here. And the last 2 at the bottom have a washer underneath them. There's all the fasteners for that. Now the screen tilts up. Pop that out. Now that the shield has been removed, I'm going to lay that off to the side because that gets replaced by a new shield for the new fairings. Next thing I'll do is take the mirrors off, and there's just 2 little nuts on the bottom here. There's 2. We'll start by taking the old fairing off. I'm going to start by taking the bottom one off, and then the uppers can hang in place. So I'll remove all the screws for that first, both on this side and on the other side. There's also the screws on the inside that attach that kind of middle chunk to the fairings. So you got to remove those as well. I can pull that lower fairing out from under the bike and put that off to the side. You don't have to remove all those screws in the bottom because that bottom fairing comes off in one piece. And again, the ones on the inside, the screw in the back, and these up on top. And now the whole upper fairing comes off. And don't forget to disconnect your blinker. My internal cowling is a little different because I had to modify it to fit that bigger radiator, but you got to get that internal cowling off. All right, the first thing you got to do is make sure you got your cables clear so nothing gets hung up. For example, I've got my Valentine 1 radar detection cables kind of tucked in here, so I'm going to pull that loose. Then I have the actual headlight connector itself right here. I'm going to pull that boot. Oops, that's right. And this has a headlight thing, has a little spring clip right there. You got to pull it out, and then the connector should pop right off of there. All right, so all that's clear. All right, let's do the same thing on the other side. Now we're just going to take these 2 screws here on each side, and the whole front fairing and light should all come off. Now I'm going to get the inside one loose, but I'm not going to take it all the way out yet so I don't have a sag issue. All right, now I'm going to do the other side. And this is the last screw here. Oops. Make sure to hold onto the fairing so that it doesn't all fall. Okay. And there's your headlight and front fairings. The kit came with a replacement carbon fiber radiator reservoir. So I need to swap those out, which means first I got to drain the fluid out of the old one. Now to drain it, fortunately I have an empty protein container. So I'm just going to loosen this clamp on the bottom because we need to reuse that. There we go. A little messy, not bad. Well, that's draining. Pop this top breather off here. Fluid's out. I gotta take these 2 bolts out. Let's get it in place first. All right, the reservoir is attached with those 2 bolts now. All right, because that tube split, taking it off, I've got to go get a new section of this from somewhere. I found what looks like a suitable replacement hose, so I'll go ahead and install that. All right, hoses are back in place, set. Now, to refill the reservoir. And this reservoir actually has a little red line down there for minimum and a blue line for maxed out. So I filled it up to the max point. That's good. Now I'll just replace this plug from the old tank. Pull this plug out of the old tank. It doesn't have an attachment spot for it there, but it can still keep the fluid inside. Okay, and that's just a slip-on. So this should be done. Now we can fit the big fairing over and see how it fits and try to figure out all these brackets. And this reservoir has to tuck down inside of the front fairing, so I have to remember to do that. Gotta kind of spread the legs on this one to get around everything. It's kind of in place. So let's start with what we know, and let's put the 2 screws in the holes up here where the old rear view mirrors used to go. All right, those are in place. And we notice there's no instructions included with this body fairing bracket kit. If I look through the pieces, there are a couple that look very similar. And if we look at where the bolt hole was for the original body compared to the one on the new kit, you can see they're about that distance apart. This seems to fit all right around here, is that I use that hole in the old body hole, and then I use this for the Zeus connector in the body kit. So I'm going to install these 2 brackets, and the writing A24 and A23 are vertical, so I'll put them that way. I'll use this one here, and I'll use this one on the other side. There's a whole bunch of the Zeus connectors with the little washers, and the way those work is you basically put the bolt through here, and then you slide the washer over the backside all the way up against the bolt, and that keeps the bolt from falling out of the hole. So I'll put that one in place. Now I want to install my A24. I'm going to get one of the old fasteners out of my body kit bolts I had. I want this to come up a little bit. This may take a little bit of finagling here, but I'm going to put that edge right even with that. Then I'll tighten this guy. We'll see how that works. And these may need some fine tuning, but this is a starting point. Now I'll put the other one on the other side. Now that those brackets are in place, and the reason we do that is because these Zeus connectors, they're not a regular screw. If you've never seen one, they're just kind of a half spiral type thing, and they twist in place about, I don't know, 180 degrees or so, and then they just stick there. So they don't have normal threads. So once you get that in place, now in theory, if I can get this lined up back, okay, and see how there's just that twist and it locks in place. So that's secure, that's good. All right, so the top fairing piece is in place. It's fastened there, it's fastened up there. Reservoir's in place. All right, let's see if I can squeeze this thing underneath there now. There we go. This thing's gonna have to get chopped significantly. Okay, there's one grabbed. It's pretty obvious that this thing is hitting the exhaust and not happy about it. I hate to start cutting it before I know everything else fits, but I'm not sure I'm going to have much of an option here because that's clearly interfering. All right, so let me cut this chunk out here to start with. Always cringe a little starting to cut parts of this carbon fiber, but basically a little Dremel tool, trim it out, and then I'll go clean up all the rough edges later. I just want to get everything to fit first. Since this is in place, I'm going to try to bring the belly pan up, see if I can get those fastened in here. And then I've already cut out the notch down there for the exhaust. So if I can get it in place, we'll see what else does or doesn't fit. Yeah, it's hitting over on the kickstand. I'm going to have to clear some out of that. Now back here, I've already cut some away for the exhaust. I don't really need to be melting plastic and starting a fire. This one, there should be a bolt between that point and down here. So let's look in my parts bin to see what we've got here. Best I can tell is that something like this perhaps. I think we got a little bit of give here, so let's try that. Let's grab another bolt and washer. Stick that through. Since it's going to be easier to put the Zeus connector in the bottom and then screw this to the top, I'm just going to chop that little corner off here so it's easy. There's no point in fighting this thing. I'm going to have a lot of work cleaning up edges, but at least this will make it easier. The bottom's in place. I can raise this. There. Now this particular bracket is missing currently because I never had that one on after the rebuild. So I'm going to wait with that one and do it later. You can see down here that the body is now hitting the exhaust closer over here, so I got to chop a little bit more of that out. Now, because I chopped this out before I had everything fitted properly, now I got too much of a gap there, but whatever, it'll be fine. It looks like this hole here is almost directly in front of the body bracket hole from the stock ones behind it. So I think there's a bracket that's almost a 1-for-1. That must go here, so let me go find that. You can see that kickstand is going to come down and hit it. So I'm going to have to cut a chunk out right there. I'll just kind of tape it off for now and cut it while it's off the bike. And then that bolt would normally be some kind of a bracket off here, but I can't do that because I have the kickstand and everything in the way. And that's only because this is a 2010 that was converted to the 2018 drive line, and so we had to do funny stuff with the shifters and all that. I'm going to trace out your boundaries. Some of this is kind of putting a Calvert eye on stuff, but all right, there we go. Now I'll just cut that like that to clear the kickstand. I think what I'm going to do, since everything is in place, is I'm going to leave this sit overnight. For some reason, carbon fiber just seems like it kind of has to sit in the proper position to kind of take shape. After I give it a day, then I can start taking these off, notching and cleaning up some of these cuts, put that bracket back in place. It's not pretty necessarily, but I think it'll get me down the runway. I've finished taping off the cutout for the exhaust to even that out. I've got the one underneath here for the brake tee, and then I've got the one on the other side for the kickstand. So now I'm going to take this lower panel off, cut those out, smooth everything out, and then I should be ready to bolt it back in place for good. There's the cutout for the kickstand, the exhaust, and then that one little bracket. So I've got it all cut out, smoothed out with the Dremel tool. Now I'm just doing a little bit of wet sanding on the edges, trying to make sure that it's all as smooth as it can be. Now that the front piece is bolted where it needs to be permanently, I'm going to measure the fork position here so that I can find where to drill the hole to get that brake tee clearance for the bolt to go through that tongue. Now that the front upper housing is off, I can drill the holes for the cutout area for that brake tee bolt. You can see I've got a couple pieces of tape marking it here because it's not just one hole. The forks rotate in there, so you got to have clearance for it. So it's going to be the far hole one way and the far one the other way, and then I'll have to arc it in there. So I'll go ahead and drill these out. Because it's carbon fiber, we're going to use a hole saw to cut it versus just bore it out. There's one hole. There we go, and then we'll just smooth out the edges. Should, in theory, have plenty of clearance now for that brake tee. I should have done this earlier as I kind of scuffed the frame a little bit, but I'll put some tape across this just to try to minimize how much scuffing I do slipping that body on. First I'll slide the bottom underneath here. Now the whole trick with this body kit in final assembly is to tighten the fasteners in order of hardest to easiest. The two easiest will probably be the two screws that hold the front of the fairing to where the rear view mirrors go. So those will probably be last. Things like this, because I cut away clearance, it'll be easier to put this screw in after the zoot screws in. So I'll put that screw into that bracket. Now I'll put the top fairing on. Spread them at 10 and 2. Slide it on in. Now I have to get that radiator overflow tank inside of the fairing. You gotta just look for where it's hanging up. Oh, like this one here, it's caught on the brake lines. So lesson learned, feed the tongue in over the brake line first, then start sliding everything back. Overflow tank inside the fairing. Okay, so everything's close. I'll go ahead and rip these off now. Now from what I've been seeing, the upper to lower bolts have been some of the biggest challenges to get in place. So I'm going to do those first. And this side, then I'll go to the other side, because you have to kind of insert that little corner in. There's 1, 2. Okay. So right now it would probably stay on, but for a little bit extra security, we'll go ahead and get these other 2 in place. It's way easier with that little cutout just to be able to access that bolt. We've got clearance around our exhaust pipe so nothing's touching, and set the world on fire there. This particular one, it slides in and then you just barely get your wrench through there. Now we got to put the zoot screw or whatever in the panel. 3. On. Okay. Now all we have is the 2 up here, and then we can do the windscreen. Hopefully these go in fairly easily after everything else. Okay, I'm going to wait to tighten these guys until I get that windscreen lined up and make sure that's going to work well. Now it's time to put the windscreen in. I took these 2 bolts back out so that I have a little bit more flexibility to get this, because you can see it's going to have to be spread out. You've got these 6 rivets, which are similar to what you'd find in car body panel rivets. I'm going to start down at the bottom because these are probably going to be the hardest ones to get. There's 1, there's 2, and 6. Now we'll get our bolts back into the holes for the fairing down to the rearview mirror mounts. This bolt is just too long and it's hitting the master cylinder and cables. So I'm going to take it out and put that shorter one in. And here's where we cut out for our kickstand. You can see it clears everything just fine. So that's good. So we still get maximum aerodynamic effects while still being functional. It's a little hard to see, but you can kind of see where my cutout is back here on that tongue, and it looks like it lines up well. So I'm going to put the bolt and spacer back through that brake tee and get that all secured. Bolt's tight, everything still clears the cutout nicely, and the tongue's still in place. I did go back and change that screw to make it match this one just because I'm OCD about it. And plus this one is actually a shorter screw, which means it's less weight. I'll go way faster now. Even though I thought of it earlier, forgot that throat piece that goes between this intake and the actual intake inside here. Well, I finagled it in there, but unfortunately I had to take all this loose again, which means I got to fight all that plastic back on, which blows, but whatever. Now I want to recreate the design that I had on the other carbon fiber panels, which will be fairly easy to do. The one change I'm making is instead of an aluminum machined axe badge here, I'm going to use what GT3s do from Porsche by taking and replacing a heavy badge with a light sticker. As always, the first step is to make sure the surface is clean. Now remember, since we get an additional 5 horsepower for every sticker we put on the bike, we want to get as many on there as we can, especially if it's something that we bought that we're not actually being sponsored for. Now this bottom strip might be a bit of a trick, but All right, decals are all on. One last thing to do. There's an additional 5, 10, 15, 20 horsepower per side of the bike, so should be fast now. Subscribe to my YouTube channel below and let's celebrate turning fuel and air into adrenaline.